Good day, everyone. Welcome to our online event today on the topic of science for humanity. My name is Tuan from SGInnovate. We are a Singapore government-owned organization that invests in and helps build deep tech innovations from Singapore for the world. We invest in startups, work with scientists to build and commercialize research, build deep tech talent, as well as work with our ecosystem partners to scale deep tech innovations around the world. And we are very passionate about harnessing science and technology innovation to make lives better for everyone. This is a particular domain where Singapore and Switzerland have had very strong collaborations on. And this is why today, SGInnovate and the Embassy of Switzerland in Singapore are co-presenting to you a very exciting conversation on science for humanity. To get us started, I would now like to invite Dr. Lim Jue, CEO at SGInnovate, to give us his opening remarks. Dr. Lim, please.
Thanks, Tuan, and a very good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this session. Thank you for joining us. I'm very, very happy and honored to be doing this alongside Ambassador Fillier of the Embassy of Switzerland in Singapore. You know, one of the most uplifting developments in the midst of this pandemic has been, you know, the breadth, the depth, and the speed of the response of the scientific community. And this, of course, is built upon the shoulders of previous giants, previous generations of giants, built upon the scientific knowledge that has been painfully acquired over decades and centuries, from electricity to penicillin, from the internet to molecular biology. I mean, the list is endless. You know, the important thing is that it is part of a collective and historical stream of consciousness that is based on deep thought and deep science leading to deep technology, and one in which finds its most potent expression in deep collaborations and deep relationships. So, you know, I'm very, very happy to be doing this with the Swiss Embassy today. I think hopefully it portends the kind of a deep relationship that I think ultimately we must work towards in order for science to really address the challenges that face humanity. Within our own portfolio at SGInnovate, you know, we've also seen some of our companies respond to the call to arms, companies like Bioformis, like Lucent, like Structo. And I just want to point out that, you know, these are pivots that they've taken, and they're not without considerable sacrifice. So today's event, I mean, as a standard bearer of the deep tech community in Singapore, you know, SGInnovate together with the Swiss Embassy, today's event is really a respectful nod to all the scientists out there, and your role in not just the current pandemic, but of course, you know, challenges in general, the goal of improving the human condition. Today we have three very special individuals, all from Switzerland, representing government, and that's Mr. Nicholas Nigli, who's Deputy Secretary General of the Republic and State of Geneva. We have Nikki Wenderoth, representing academia from the very premier ETH Zurich. And then we have Dr. Carolina Pinat, representing industry, Nestle in particular. But before I hand you over to them, please allow me to invite Ambassador Fillier to say a few words. Ambassador.
Dr. Lim, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests and friends, it is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Swiss Embassy in Singapore to this event on science and humanity, co-organized with SGInnovate, which I would like to thank warmly for the initiative and the support. What a fascinating subject. Innovation in science and technology have transformed the human landscape across the globe. It is now evident that embracing digital technologies is a crucial component for successful participation in the global economy. For Southeast Asia, the digital transformation has the potential to create new sources of productivity and wealth in one of the world's fastest growing regions. The cloud services, the Internet of Things, data-driven applications and algorithm processes have great potential to improve supply-customer connections, manufacturing and supply chains, as well as to increase innovation and productivity. Daily lives will be transformed through smart cities, health tech, new payment technologies, among different things. The opportunities are huge. However, there are some ethical questions that need to be addressed. From the collection of data to their use by artificial intelligence, automation, cybercrime or fake news, digitalization of society poses challenges. Despite best intentions, these technologies have the potential to cause adverse disruptions and may affect human rights, financial stability, or political processes. In addition, they can increase social inequality and shift control away from humans to algorithms. In September last year, Geneva inaugurated Swiss Digital Initiative, a foundation that brings together large multinational corporations, international organizations, academia and governments, with the main objective of ensuring ethical standards in the digital world. Geneva, which is the home to more than 38 international institutions and organizations, 179 permanent representations to the United Nations, and approximately 750 NGOs, is at the heart of multilateral diplomacy and international cooperation. Geneva is therefore positioning itself as the next global hub for digital ethics, and Switzerland as a role model on how to tackle challenges and questions around digitalization. So I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists from across Switzerland, and I'm very glad, to have also the participation of Nicolas Nigli directly in Geneva and directly in the heart of this new global hub for digital ethics. Without further, I pass the floor to Sheki Sim, our moderator for the discussion. She's the head of communication and brand at Singapore Innovate and was part of the pioneer team. I wish you a successful event and very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you, Jui, for gracing us with this event and for your very meaningful opening speeches. And with that, I want to welcome everybody. It's very interesting, actually, from when we moved all our events online, we found that we've gotten participation from across the globe. And look at this panel. Nobody is here in Singapore except for me. And we've got everyone from all the panelists here from Switzerland, and Carol, who joins us from Nestle. And this session today is important because, well, as we talked about, everyone's talking about the pandemic. It's something which is bothering everybody today, and all the more important, right? We now see that science is so important, the impact of science and the potential it has to positively impact humanity. We've seen that with the pandemic, researchers from across the globe are rushing to find a vaccine, and we've also seen governments very quickly fast-tracking regulations. Companies and startups are pivoting to create solutions to serve the needs that the pandemic has created. So I think today we're going to have a great discussion. It's very, very timely. And at this point, I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists with their individual backgrounds spanning from government, academia, and corporate. I think the discussions we're going to be having will be pretty robust, and to get perspectives from each of them on this subject, I think we'll have a very, very good discussion on that. And now I'd like to ask each of the panelists to please give a short introduction. And I'd like to start with Nicolas, please. You're on mute, Nicolas.
Oh yeah, I was asking, can you hear me? Good morning, and thank you so much for giving me the floor. In fact, I should have pleaded for ladies going first, but I don't want us to lose time. Thank you so much for Singapore Innovate and to the Swiss Embassy in Singapore for hosting this e-event. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you today. In a few words, I'm the Deputy Secretary General at the Republican State of Geneva, in charge of economic development, research and innovation. I've been working on this now the 3.5 last years. Before that, I was for 15 years in the field of economic and science diplomacy in Switzerland. So I'm working on sort of ecosystem-related strategies, platform dynamics, as well as foresight, developing essentially holistic thinking about Geneva's USPs, unique selling proposals, present and future. This leads me essentially to work at the crossroads of 4 different job descriptions. The first is bridge building, linking the different parts of the ecosystem. The Geneva global governance ecosystem, Ambassador Fillier spoke about earlier, formidable business and financial center, but also the excellence, the academic excellence. The second sort of job description that applies to me is translator. If we speak about linking different parts of the ecosystem, you need to translate between them. They talk about the same issues, but they talk about them differently. So we need to translate to make sure they understand themselves properly. Then I consider myself a bit to be a midwife, because it's about helping projects to get born and to then grow, and that's a huge pleasure of mine. And last but not least, I think I'm a bit of a sorcerer. I have to find ways to understand what's ahead of us, where the challenges are, where the opportunities are, and so it's always one foot in the present and one foot in the future, but also having the past in mind, because if we don't understand where we come from, it's very hard to get us in the future. So that's in a few words what I'm doing. Thank you.
Fantastic, Nicholas. Looks like you really have your hands full with all that you're doing at the moment. Well, let's move on to Professor Nikki from ETH Zurich. If you could please share a little bit about your role and what you're currently doing, please, Nikki.
Thanks, Seki. And let me start with also saying thank you for organizing this event. I think this is extremely timely and very exciting also to meet the other panelists here. So I'm a professor for human neuroscience at ETH Zurich, but I'm mainly sitting here because I'm also the director of a big research program that is taking place at the Singapore ETH campus. And in this big research program, we are aiming to develop future health technologies. And we are trying to bring this deep tech you were talking about really to life in the healthcare sector. So we are using artificial intelligence, robotics, many of the technology that is thought to really transform the way how we live. Now, what we are trying to do in Singapore is to transfer our knowledge from our labs into the real world, and to do that at the one hand with clinicians and patients, and at the other hand to also link up with industry. And described in a nutshell, what we are trying to do is to bring more of medical treatment and interventions away from the hospitals to the individual patients, and there specifically to the home of the patients. And that is something that is certainly in the current pandemic, something that resonates with many of us, because I think we are preparing for the new normal, if you like. And the new normal will be probably more decentralized, or healthcare and medicine will be done in a more decentralized way than we were used to do it in the past. And funny enough, that was our vision already when we created our research program. And now real life has pushed a fast forward button for us. So suddenly we have to provide our technology much faster than we thought we would have to. But at the same time, we also see that the world is becoming more open to these decentralized technology-based solutions.
Thank you, Nikki. I mean, certainly the pandemic has really forced us, right, to look at healthcare in a different way. You know, working from home is a new normal. Remote care from the healthcare perspective is also going to be a new normal. And I want to talk a little bit about later on, also about, you know, when you talk about taking some of these innovations from lab to the hospital, you know, the kind of challenges that you face and the realities, right? And I think that's an interesting but very, very important area because that really is the future. Before we get into the panel proper, may I please call on Carol from Nestle to please share a little bit about yourself, please, Carol?
Sure, and thank you as well for inviting me. Apologies for cheating, sort of, and not connecting from Switzerland. I usually commute a lot between Barcelona and Vevey, which is where Nestle's headquarters, but due to the travel ban, this is not possible. Hopefully it will soon. But this goes to show, like Nikki was saying, that things are like super decentralized. And Nestle itself is a very decentralized company. We operate in 187 countries, Singapore, one of them, of course. And it was a very, each market has a lot of autonomy in decision making, and this also translates in how we do innovation. My role specifically within Nestle is I'm the global product director for new generation technologies. What this means is I help scale up technologies that are not yet part of the business as usual for Nestle. Think artificial intelligence or augmented reality or chatbots. And so I help take them from a technology that we can leverage into something that's fully integrated with our processes, ways of working, and our legacy systems. We have a lot of legacies, you can imagine. We are a 154-year-old company, right? And I work a lot also with our R&D organization on the digital nutrition space, because that brings digital and advanced nutrition equally. So I have a lot of interactions, and I'm going to be talking today a lot about that. And so my background is fully technology. So I'm probably the techie in the room, an electrical engineer. I've always worked in technology, but funnily I've worked in technology applied to non-traditional technology things. I've worked for healthcare, I've worked for mobility and car makers, and now a food company. So that brings, you know, I think an interesting background. I've worked for corporates, I've worked for startups, and I've even had my stint in kind of an sort of bridge between academia and the private sector. That's where I got my PhD. So I think I have a background that's pretty unique.
Fantastic. Well, thank you and welcome again. Thank you all for joining us. I really would like to have this session as interactive as possible. So to the audience, we've got about 100 people joining us today, this afternoon Singapore, this morning in Europe. I always like to know where people are joining us from. So if you could, in the chat box, just share, do a shout out, tell us where you're dialing in from. We always love to see the breadth and scope of our events and how it's gone global. So please share with us and tell us where you're calling us from. And we would also like to get to answer questions from the floor. And for the attendees, please do submit your questions in the Q&A box. And we will target to answer as many questions as possible later during the session. So today's topic is science and humanity. We've talked a little bit about, you know, the role of science in history. Deep tech has been very, very important for the betterment of humanity. We talked about the discovery of penicillin, electricity. I really don't think we can imagine what our lives would be like without these two great discoveries. So as a kickstart to our session, I'd like to ask the panelists, against this current backdrop of COVID-19, how has the role, in your opinion, of science evolved? Has it become even more important and pressing now in solving the big global problems? And as you kind of share your perspective, maybe if you could share a few examples that you've seen or are working on in your specific areas of work. And perhaps I'll start with the lady now, if I could call on Nicole to please give your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Seki. So I think we all have realized that actually policy making has been very strongly influenced by scientific evidence. I think actually more so than ever, at least it has never been so much in the public eye. And that was necessary because we are really facing the unknown. And of course, research and academics, that is our training to provide knowledge relatively fast and to guide decision-making. And in this pandemic, I think it has really forced us to go down that way. Now, if you ask me about examples where, of course, technology plays a major role, I think one thing that is very much in the area we are working in with distributed technology, these are all the tracking apps that are out now. And I think this is this is one very nice example how new technology gives us really new tools that we can relatively easily scale up to large populations and now get insights about individuals that really help us to control, for example, the pandemic. Now, I think that's also one example where you can exemplify a little bit the challenges for developing this new technology, because we typically try to do that for the greater good, if you like. And here, of course, the one greater good is to protect the population from infection, but there's also another greater good, and that is privacy. And certainly in Switzerland, there is a lot of debate where how much of my personal privacy do I have to sacrifice for helping the population and reducing infection in general. And I think this is a very interesting discussion that really has to be held on different levels, on the medical level, on the tech development level, on the data ethics and governance level. I think it's exemplifying the challenges of these new technologies, but it's also showing that technology can actually help to solve these more complex questions, because I think we are at a point where, for example, we can do tracing in a way where we don't sacrifice privacy too much. And that is a system that was talked about in Singapore, for example, where data are not centrally saved, but where they are dealt with what we would call at the edge. So at the end user, there's still some control about which data is shared.
Yeah, certainly. I think that, we can see more and more urgency in the deployment in these areas with this current climate. Nicholas, what are you seeing from your end from the public sector perspective?
First of all, I think it's a fascinating question. It's relevant to note that pandemics have been big changers in human history. And there is no coming back. A lot of people sort of argue still we need to go back to sort of like normal times. There is no such thing if you look into economic and social history and long terms. And it's fascinating to see that these pandemics have always engineered or, big change. The plagues of the Middle Age favored the religious. There was this incomprehension in the face of these terrible plagues and the belief that the hand of God was essentially a plausible explanation. But then the discovery of the bacillus responsible for cholera, I think at the end of the 19th century, marked the advent of scientific beliefs. And that was certainly a stepping stone in terms of medical science. At that time, a very, very parallel to today, in fact, scientific adventure and discoveries did occupy the front pages of newspapers. And this is an era of great scientists. You think about Koch, Pasteur, and this is very clearly associated with the fight against diseases and pandemics. What's really interesting is with the Spanish flu, doctors gave way to a certain extent, at least, to technicians. We had these incredibly high numbers of people dying in this pandemic, and doubts arose. Is science still able to do the trick? And the technical approach essentially took over more and more. In the 1930s, viruses started to be cultivated in sort of hen's eggs that allowed to create the first vaccines, and sort of technology and machines established a growing presence. And this leads me to today. Today, and I think it's been said as an introduction, we have seen, and this is fantastic, unprecedented scientific collaboration. But this pandemic we're in at the moment is also the illustration of the conquest of the machine with the emergence of algorithms and AI as a key component. Algorithms and machine learning are playing a bigger and bigger role. It's been interesting. We've been highlighting what has changed, no? And we spoke about the apps, teleworking. There is a joke going around, you know, we are now working from home. Perhaps not. In fact, perhaps we are sleeping from the office, you know. And then what's driving digital transformation? Is it traditionally you would think it would be the CEO or the CTO? No, now it's COVID-19. And so you see this incredible change. Teleworking, teleeducation, telemedicine are through the roof, and AI, data analysis at a very large scale is indeed taking over and defines to a large extent how governments, people in charge, are indeed responding or are indeed supposed to respond to this pandemic. Obviously, all of this poses new questions, and I think that the point about ethics has been mentioned. I would fundamentally agree with this. AI in ethics is gaining ground. This is a debate which we need to accelerate. But then there is also this whole question of trust. With digitalization becoming so much more prevalent, what does trust in this new time really mean? How can we fortify it, knowing that if it doesn't exist, the situation is going to become problematic? And the third element to me, which is absolutely crucial and on which we are working on, is the whole notion of cybersecurity. With accelerated digitalization, with more and more things happening in the cloud, the cyber risk is also growing, and new answers need to be brought to the table.
You know, Nicholas, you bring up very, very important points, and to that note, right, it's also the role of government, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But the role of government, you know, are they enablers or inhibitors? And I think that we can all agree, and I think that's why it's so nice that we have such a great representation on the panel here from the different perspectives, because it is really the sum of all parts. It is not just the role of one entity, but it is the role of multiple entities coming together in partnership. So we'll talk a bit more about that. I'd like to get your view, Carol, because you're representing the corporate, the private entity. What do you see, how do you see the role of science now in this current pandemic in the Nestle environment?
So we are facing this pandemic from two different angles, right? So one is, as an essential industry, we had to secure that food supplies would continue, right? Which has been a challenge, right, on many fronts, on keeping our employees safe, but also making sure that we got our products through the supply chain onto manufacturing, and then onto the homes of our customers, right? And that involved a lot of technology, and that kind of boosted our digital transformation by probably months or years. That we had to do things very fast. For example, two of the deployments that I had to do within weeks were one providing a remote assistance to our factory floor workers, so they could maintain the very complex machinery that we have in the factories, the robots, right? Because our engineers cannot fly in for maintenance and or support. So we used a lot of augmented reality instructions for that. Or we also deployed chatbots to help with online purchases and sort of direct to consumers, because people were not going to the grocery store as much, right? And that goes to show also how global this pandemic has been. That has happened in most of our 187 markets. That's one. Second one is we have seen, probably because during lockdown, we've had also more time to reflect, that we're advancing as a society towards a more conscious. We were already seeing that trend of more sort of nutritious and healthier food choices, and also shifting towards more of a plant-based diet, that has accelerated. Judging by, you know, the products, the Nestle products that people are buying, we've seen a shift towards, you know, healthier foods as well. And you know, there's a lot of science behind developing, you know, nutritious foods and plant-based diets. So we're seeing a boost, and that's where we're putting a lot of our focus as well.
Fantastic. I'd love to get, you know, into a bit more discussion around that later on. But I'd like to talk about, it's a very good segue into my next question. Nicholas, during our discussion earlier on, you talked about your belief in the 3 Ps. Public-private partnership for purpose, people, and planet. I love it. I think that it is such a great mantra, but I also want to bring that back to talking about how technology moving faster than regulation, right? Sometimes the regulation just can't keep up. So when we want to get new innovative solutions out the door that will benefit society, what is the role of government? Sometimes it can be an inhibitor, right? But we need governments to be enablers. So give us your perspective in your role, some of the successes that you've seen, the successful models that you've seen in the pursuit of innovation, and what are some of the challenges and learning points you could share with the audience here?
Thank you. Another absolutely fascinating question. Governance, and you hinted to that. Governments have to, on the one side, be enablers, and on the other side, to be regulators. And I don't mean here to put these 2 things in a particular order. They have to be present on the 2 fronts. On the regulatory side, and to your point, I would simply note that technology, especially frontier technologies, can't be regulated efficiently just by states. At least that's what we have seen dealing with these issues. We have launched in Geneva the Geneva Digital Talks in 2017 to essentially start conversations, look at how we can create bits and pieces moving towards what I call governance 2.0, where essentially we work multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary, trying to implement new approaches, a bit in the spirit of what Henri Dunant did in his time when he founded the Red Cross, a fabulous governance and humanitarian innovation, where essentially technology and humanity started meeting in Geneva. At the moment, about 50% of the global discussions around digital governance are taking place in Geneva, the most active multilateral center on this planet. But where we, I think, need the next big revolution is we have to stop working in different silos. We can't just have the trade issues addressed in one corner, and then the IP part in another, and the cybersecurity element in a third corner. We need to start these multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approaches, much more holistic approaches. And I think that's what the future of governance has to be. And this leads me to the second side, to the enabling side. And I think here as well, governments can play very important and have to play very important roles in this context. Because as I said earlier on, the challenges we are facing are really too big, really too important to be tackled by either the private or the public sector. And the state can be a facilitator in terms of building these public-private partnerships for people, planet, and purpose. This is what we are trying to do. So you asked me about examples of what we do here in Geneva, and sort of to illustrate the 2 sides of Geneva. Geneva's DNA is very, on the one side, obviously, it's local. It's a city, but on the other side, it's it's very global because we have this global governance platform here. So the first example is very much local, but you will see how much it's linked to the global side. Recognizing that it's really important to move quickly from a short-term crisis effectiveness response to the medium-term structural change, we have launched with some partners a crisis innovation and resilience fund. We've spent countless days and nights with some colleagues to build this open innovation platform. Again, all of the institutions in town invited to come together to think about common challenges we need to face within this crisis, but also having in mind other crises we have to face. Think about, you know, the climate change, inequality, biodiversity loss, and so on and so on. So here, again, the state can really play the role of a Kickstarter and a bridge builder. And what we see up to now, and we've just launched this new scheme, is the response is absolutely amazing. The second example, very quickly, and that's the really global part and where we can learn from science quite a bit, is CERN. Geneva hosts CERN, the physics, particle physics European Center, and they have been building the most technically complex experiment ever made in human history, the Large Hadron Collider. So this is particle physics. But above and beyond that, CERN is providing us a model for people from all over the world, scientists from all over the world, to come together and to push the frontiers of science and technology for the benefit of all. And that is, to me, absolutely crucial at the moment. This is the lesson we have to draw from at the moment. We need to cooperate better, more intensively, if we want to come together. And the local part and the global part in Geneva, they really come together. We built the bridges in between them. And here the state is very clearly an enabler.
Fantastic. So, Nikki, I'd like to get your perspective because you're dealing in healthcare from the research perspective, but certainly with healthcare, which is highly regulated. How do you see, in your experience, the role of government? Has it been more helpful in enabling, or have you seen inhibitors from the government perspective in terms of regulation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to answer that from the perspective of academia. So I think the perspective on governance and regulation, you have to look at that from two sides. So at the one side, we think that this is sometimes holding us back. We cannot proceed as quickly as we would like to do that. At the other hand, especially in healthcare, it's really important that whatever you bring out there, you have to earn the trust of the stakeholders in the system. And just to reiterate, the stakeholders, these are patients, these are carers of patients, these are doctors and medical specialists in the hospitals, but these are also, in the end, payers and the people who finance the system. And ideally, you have to trust, you have to earn the trust from all of these stakeholders. And regulation is certainly helping with that. It is forcing us to, for example, make sure that when we make medical claims, that when we say, I give you this device and it will help you, that we have some evidence supporting this claim. And that is per se not a bad thing. Now, I think the real question is, so knowing that we have these two perspectives, at the one hand, it's needed that we are regulated. On the other hand, sometimes it's a bit difficult to really drive technology. The question is, can we find a solution for this dilemma, or what looks like a dilemma? And actually, I think Singapore has a solution for that. And that is really something very specific in the Singapore system. And these are the so-called regulatory sandboxes. And regulatory sandboxes are, let's say, projects. It's a defined space of data and stakeholders where you have some control in it. And there you can try and test governance instruments. And for our own project, we got very, very much inspired by this idea, because what we are trying to do with our health technology, we are pursuing this multidisciplinary approach that Nicholas was referring to, where we have to bring together partners from many different disciplines around the table and try to define, let's say, problems that are worthwhile solving. So something that humanity is really benefiting from, the people that provide a solution, but all of that has to happen within a good governance framework, because our technology in the end has to earn the trust of our participants and also of the end users. And therefore this is very important. Now we are living in a world where probably our governance cannot be as rigid and fixed as it used to be 10 years ago, because the opportunities are growing so quickly that we probably have to think about new governance models where the governance can keep up with this pace. And that is one aspect that we are trying to address from a research point of view. So we built our own little microcosm of healthcare and healthcare technology, where we have defined patients, defined medical doctors. We collect some data under very restricted rules that we give ourselves. And this allows us to try different governance models within our little microcosm and hopefully come up with a new way of doing governance, which is more adaptive, which is more flexible, and which is also solving some of the challenges to, again, let patients and doctors participate, for example, when we are talking about sharing data.
I think it's very true, right? Especially in the areas of science and technology, when things are moving so fast, regulation can't keep up, right? And there needs to be that. And for innovation to thrive, there needs to be some experimentation and a pushing of boundaries of sorts. And let's talk about, AI ethics, right? AI, is something which is so prevalent, and there's a lot of implementation. But there aren't, we talked about ethics a little bit, we talked about the framework, but there isn't that ethics, that regulation governing AI. And one example is when Singapore launched the AI framework 2 years ago at Davos. And it really is a framework. It's like a working document that allows private public entities to work within this framework. But it is a living document in that it allows you to change so that you are able to, as you learn new things, because it's such a fast moving technology, you then shift and change and amend the framework to be able to adjust it based on your learnings. And I think that's important because it is a journey. As we go through this journey of innovation, there isn't a playbook that we really can look to, right? We need to be designing it along the way. I want to move the conversation a little bit to Carol. In Nestle, I'm very, very interested. You talked a little bit about advanced nutrition, about how people are now moving towards more plant-based diets. I know that from your perspective, you come in from the technology side, right? I'd like to hear what it is that you are working with your R&D teams in enabling technology, or how technology, the role of technology in enabling this advanced nutrition, because at the end of the day, it's going to be better for the planet and better for humanity, right, in terms of health and wellness.
Sure. So we, I'll tell you about, what we are doing and also how we are doing it. And probably the how we are doing is the part where we're putting most of our innovation. So what we're doing is going towards personalized nutrition, right? And that ties a lot into nutrition as a way to live a healthier life, right? And that is one of our core values as well, and part of our our principles as a company, not only in the business that we make, but also in what we call creating shared value. So in the social impact, because food is such an essential part of our lives, right? And in there, digital technologies are like the engine behind that, right? That's how we can get to understand and ultimately anticipate through a lot of the use of artificial intelligence, as you mentioned. what people need and what would help them make a healthier choices, right, in their daily lives when it comes to the food that they're having for themselves, for their children, or for their pets as well. We have a line of healthy and nutritious foods for pets as well. And coming on to the AI piece and sort of the governance that you were mentioning, just we obviously are in a very regulated industry, and we follow all the regulations of the different markets where we operate that set the minimum standards. But our aim has always been to set higher standards. So we always take the regulation and then build our standards at least the level of the local regulation, wherever it is that we're selling our products. Same thing for AI. So we looked into all the different frameworks that are being created. You mentioned the one in Singapore, there's another one in the European Union, a couple of them in the US and in other markets. And then we created our ethical principles based on those and our own values as a company that we published very recently. And those are the guiding principles for ourselves and our partners when we create and apply AI. And also to continue to build trust with our consumers so they understand what we're doing with AI, right? When we make recommendations or what kind of data we're gathering and for what purpose, and for them to understand that as well. Now, on the how we're doing this, we created last year an R&D accelerator. Where we bring a lot of people that ties into Nicholas's kind of job, because this is a space where we bring obviously Nestle researchers. So we have over 4,000 of them specifically focused on R&D for food and beverage, also startups, also academia, and we work together to create the next generation of foods, right? That R&D center is located in Lausanne. We work a lot with technical schools of Lausanne and Zurich. And we're also extending that model all over the world. We have 23 R&D centers located in different countries. A little bit over half of our R&D is in Switzerland, but we are expanding as well. So, and that is new for us. We've done a lot of internal research historically in our R&D centers, and we're opening that up, right? And this is a very new effort. It's not even a year old, so very, very new. And this is changing a lot our mindset. Digital transformation at the end of the day is a lot about mindset. It's and then processes, and then yes, we use technology for those, right? So it's really exciting times for us, and I think for the world as well.
Oh, fantastic! I think I want to get to some of the questions because I'm just looking at the clock now. We don't have that much time. I want to also do a shout out to the audience. We've got folks here from the UK. We've got folks from Switzerland, from Iran, Japan, India, obviously Singapore as well. Thank you all for your questions and for all your comments. Let's get to some of these questions. You touched a little bit about this on this, Carol, but large companies like Nestle, how do you see the role of startups in today's world? And specifically, I guess, for Nestle, how do you work with startups as you go through this journey of innovation, or you try to get some innovation through the door to your consumers? Do startups play a role? How important are they?
They do. So we primarily work in 3 different ways. I'll start with the easiest one. We do, invest in startups that can provide relevant technologies for us. We also acquire some of them. So in our portfolio, we have acquired startups with different, products, food and beverage products. We're moving also more into the space of startups that produce technology and research, where we start usually investing and then eventually acquire. Then we also are working with startups in this sort of open innovation. I mentioned the R&D accelerator, but we also have outposts for in Silicon Valley and in Tel Aviv for more technology startups, where we are creating kind of these partnerships. And then the third way, and that would be more for startups that are at least in a scale-up space, is we incorporate them as partners. Just like we might work with Microsoft, then we work with smaller companies. In the example that I put at the beginning on remote assistance, we are working with startups. The startups are the ones leading in the space of creating content and running content on augmented reality these days. So we work with them, right? And so we are a 300,000 employee company working with companies that have less than 50 employees, right? And it is a balancing act, right? We need to, also modify our ways of working, for example, procurement, right? Because, we need to be able to work with companies that are very nimble, right? So yeah, we have different ways of working with them depending on the needs that we have, the maturity stage of the startup, and the ultimate strategy, which is, do we want them as partners? Do we want them as part of our company, right? That's where we direct our efforts. Do we work with, or do we invest and eventually acquire?
Hey, that's great, Carol. And I think Nico and Nicholas, I'm sure that you guys in your areas as well, Nico, in the healthcare space, with some of the things that you are working on, the new inventions, do startups play a role? Do you work with startups to make this happen?
They do. So we have in our consortium, we have actually a startup company. So to have a direct partner who's operating in the market, which makes it for us very, very easy to translate what we have developed in the lab to really bring it into the real world, if you like. Allow me to add one more thing, because we were discussing about the regulatory framework and how interdisciplinary and complicated systems are nowadays. So I think another thing that is really important is that we make it easy to deal with these challenges for startups. And what I mean with that, so a big company like Nestle has definitely ethical standards and can go beyond the minimum, but a startup cannot. And sometimes even complying with the regulations that are in place, it's really hard work. It requires a lot of money or a lot of knowledge. So one thing we are trying to create as a spin-off from our project is, so we are building, if you like, a little system to safely collect data, so safely deal with data, to safely share data. And one vision we had that once this is developed enough, this would be a tool that can be also provided to startup companies, so that when you develop your little sensor you would like to use with an end user, you have a system that works more or less plug and play, where you can put it in and you can collect it, you have governance, you have all these different layers that are important already in place, and you can use it. And that might be one of the little accelerators that might actually help to push innovation, because we are providing some ready to go solutions for some of the problems we are all facing.
I'm heartened to hear that, there is that recognition that startups operate differently, from procurement processes to, the rules of engagement. I'm heartened to hear that there is recognition there, because that is a real issue for startups when they're working with large corporates. Nicholas, what about your perspective from encouraging startups, into the innovation space in Geneva and in Switzerland? What have you seen, and what are the initiatives that are happening there? You're on mute.
It's okay. Thank you so much. We are living in the era of the exponential. Things are changing so rapidly, and in fact, the change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow again. This is what technology does to all of us. And so that requires agility, this adaptability element, and obviously accountability. But in this sphere where we need to move so quickly, where we need to adapt so quickly, obviously startups are a great asset for any ecosystem. And we have a very vibrant community here in the region around Geneva. What to us is really fascinating is to provide these entities this platform where they can meet with other players, more established players, whether it's multinationals or global governance. And it's, again, each and every one can obviously be pushed in its sphere of activity. And we obviously try to do that. We have accelerators. We have incubators here in Geneva, in this whole region. Switzerland is a very vibrant place for startups. But what we try to offer really, and that's I think what the true USP of Geneva is, we offer them also this incredible capacity to access global governance, to be very close to where the discussions happen around the future of governance. And it's interesting, no? It's not just about states or companies. We also now are starting to use AI in looking into how regulation of AI and ethics, for instance, works. So and here again, we need small, nimble companies being able to work very fast. But our challenge, and I think we all share this same challenge, is on the one side we need to bring those with a bit more legacy along, allow them to essentially rejuvenate, to accelerate the pace of change within, but we also need to constantly allow those with the energy to start something new to grow. And we try to really act on the two fronts. To us, and I think that's something that came into this conversation quite a bit, this notion of digital commons, of creating this capacity of open innovation is also something we invest a lot into, and lots of startups buy into it, because there is this recognition based on the work of Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom, that, you know, at the end of the day, the value added created by these commons, this open innovation, will then be internalized in different ways along the route. And so we try to encourage the different players within this ecosystem to work along these lines, because at the end of the day, we can, all of us, we can benefit from it. And more importantly, we really can marry, we can get together, on the one side, profit, and companies are in there to make profit. That will remain the case, but also this idea of purpose. And for anybody wanting to join those two things, this is really where the place where technology meets humanity, and that's what we want to keep developing.
That's fantastic. I think to your point too about bringing different players together, I mean, that's really why we have these community events too at SGInnovate. You know, we partner with the Swiss Embassy, and, you know, we've got great representation from Swiss partners on the panel here, is really showing the different perspectives and getting folks connected. Although we're not face to face, but the power of technology, right, to enable us to connect. We've got questions here. Well, you know, Carol, you shared about your accelerator. We've got people who are interested in your accelerator, and it's really bringing people together, because it's, again, it's a sum of all parts, right? It's a public-private partnerships to enable folks to come together, like-minded, you know, in wanting to achieve a particular mission, for us to work together on that. We have time for one last question, and I think this is a big question. This is for all on the panel. When you're talking about the betterment of humanity, is there a divide between the haves and the have-nots? Will technologically advanced countries benefit more than countries who are not? Is it all about technology? So how can we solve challenges related to hunger, climate change as a global population? Big question. I'm going to pose it to, you know, Nicholas first, since from the government perspective, I'd like to get your view on that.
To me, this is not a question, it is an obligation. We need to move along this route, and we need to be more inclusive. Very interestingly, just yesterday, another Geneva-based institution, the World Economic Forum, came out with this notion of the Great Reset. The idea that we need to restart, to do things differently. And they announced that in 2021, the whole program is going to be around how we essentially can rethink how we can move forward. And to me, this is absolutely fundamental. That's why I said it's about building public and private partnerships for people, the planet, and purpose. If we don't have these three elements covered, we are going to fail. The road well-traveled up to now, we do know now, and again, thanks to science, we know now it is not possible to keep on using. So we need to reinvent ourselves. That's on the one side, a formidable challenge, but on the other side, an amazing opportunity for us all. And that's also why we invest so much of our energy and in our time, including when it comes to linking sustainable finance, impact finance, blended finance to global governance to accelerate the SDG implementation. Also on how we link the technological work we do with technical assistance. It's about being inclusive. And to a certain extent, what we try to do is to create in Geneva this idea that SDG 17, creative partnerships for the implementation of the goals, is the sort of overarching principle of what we try to do. Because we have all of the components, it's about now putting them together and getting us accelerating for the benefit of the many, not for the few.
Nicole and Nikki and Carol, do you have any thoughts? Is it all about technology?
So I think it's not all.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. So it's certainly not all about technology, but technology will play an important role in the challenges we are facing and also the solutions we will provide. And certainly it's also about mindset. It's giving up some convenience that we got used to, but technology will be an important mitigator, if you like, to not give up what we love and is dear to us and still fight challenges like hunger, climate change, or other things. Let me maybe add, so I mean, this all sounds very theoretically and very high level, but let's maybe pin that down to something a bit more concrete. So when it comes down to healthcare technologies, of course, one benefit is that we are trying to package some clinical intelligence, that is how we call it, into a device. And then you can give this device to people, and you also give this clinical intelligence to people. And that is one way to bridge what we would call an expertise gap, that in some less developed countries, in some areas, there's not as much expertise, and the more developed, and that is not surprising. So when you can now package that as a technology, you can make this expertise available to much larger bases of users, and that very often explicitly includes also those that are less privileged than we are.
Very interesting perspective. Carol, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think to your questions of, who will benefit, haves versus have-nots, haves will benefit faster from technology, that's for sure, because they have access to it. Our perspective from Nestle is, this is at the end of the day, an issue of a quality of life, right? And technology is here to help us enhance our quality of life. So our efforts are going into programs to actually increase the quality of life. Due to our size, we have a huge impact, and we also work a lot with markets that are less developed. That's think coffee producing or cocoa producing markets. So we have programs to actually enhance quality of life for the families and the communities there, and also for the planet in terms of, for example, water, or getting rid of plastic, right? In which the food industry is a great big contributor due to all the packaging. And then in all these programs that we have as part of our shared value creation, that they are aligned with the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. And again, due to our size, we can have an impact. Like, we have a program for healthy nutrition for children that has already covered 50 million. Right? That's what happens when you operate around the globe, or 30 million families in the communities that work closely with our supply chain. And this is where we're going into helping raise the quality of life, and then other things will follow. And obviously, we're also adapting our own digital transformation according to what's possible. Like I'm working with a program, and for example, in Central and West African region, where internet connection is shakier than in in other places. Although I had a blackout like half an hour ago here. Supposed to have like the most stable fiber network in the world. There you go. And then we're adapting our own, for example, e-commerce to the
we see
messages on mobile, because that's what they have, right? So we're on the improving quality of life and adapting to the reality of the technology and the infrastructure.
I think it is like what Nicholas said, right? It is a duty. We are duty bound to help the less fortunate. The richer countries, the more well-off countries, we are duty-bound. Just even within our own communities, I think we're duty-bound to help those who are less fortunate, right? And technology can certainly be a strong enabler. I think that we've come to the end of our session. We have overrun a little bit, and I want to thank every one of our speakers here. I see that Ambassador Fabrice has come back on. Ambassador, would you like to say a few words before we close the session?
Thank you. I would just like to say thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Singapore Innovate to have given us that platform to have this very interesting exchange this afternoon. And of course, also thank you from all the participants. I have seen that they connected from all over the world, Switzerland, Singapore, but also many other countries. So I'm very glad, with the interest shown to our event. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Dri, would you like to say some parting words? You're on mute, Dri.
No, nothing further to add beyond what Ambassador Fillier has said. Just a very heartfelt thank you to all the panelists for giving us your time today, and for all the participants for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And as you leave, we always want to get feedback from you on what you thought of the session. We are always wanting to improve areas and other areas that you want to be hearing, other topics that you want us to be addressing. Please give us that feedback. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Dri, and to all our panelists. I appreciate that very much, and to the Swiss Embassy for this wonderful partnership. And with that, please stay safe wherever you are, from Singapore to Tunisia to Iran to Europe. Have a good day for everyone. Bye-bye.
Farewell.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.